The experience of being human has many universal qualities that make it easier to learn together than apart. The purpose of Emotional Warrior Radio is to bring the learning processes one goes through in talk therapy out into the world, so everyone has the opportunity for growth. Come and join us on this journey. Welcome everyone to the last session with our guest working on communicating clearly with her mother the changes she would like to see in their relationship. I call the courage she exhibits in this session and the extreme fortitude she exhibits a definite moment of growth and a clear passage into mature womanhood. She is someone that can walk forward with her head up, ask for help, and accept it when offered, as well as continue to show up for those she loves and that love her during difficult times. This session is well organized and full of great insight on the practical steps she took and how she moved through the conversation with her mother without being drawn into old emotional patterns. I hope you enjoy. Please listen and learn. Okay, welcome. So I think today what we're trying to do is to get a snapshot of what's happened over the last week and understand that and unpack it, because there's always a process with the time that passes between sessions. So I'm very interested in that. Also, how you felt about how how the sessions have been going as well, and where you are now with what we were talking about at the end of last session, with really talking with your mom and having those conversations. So I'll let you begin. Most likely, I think most experienced near how you're doing your week and where you're at.
Yeah. It's definitely been, I would probably describe it as last week was one of the hardest weeks I can remember in recent memory, possibly one of the hardest of my life. But I knew that I had the tools to get through it. It was a lot about just kind of pushing the sickening feeling, that auto response that comes up of, I don't really want to say this to my mother. It feels like in the deepest part of me, like I'm doing something wrong. And so much of my anxiety around the week was pushing that down and saying, like, I will feel better once I just do this. And I had a lot of people kind of saying the same thing to me, my partner and my friends, like, just once you do it, it's not going to feel as horrible as it feels right now.
Right. And that anticipatory, right, anxiety, I absolutely think that you describe it very well as a physical reaction that people want to know what to do to set boundaries, but what we really are doing is deconstructing and reconstructing a bond that is at a physical level, right? Psychologically, obviously too, and emotionally, but I think you see that when you really do this work all the way from, you get to the root, that's a real challenge. There is quite a bit of emotional labor that goes into doing this work, and that you have to be ready and prepared. But you said, you have this way of being able to balance. It's not, a lot of people look at emotions as all one thing and go, whoa, I can't go there. Like, it's going to overwhelm me. It's not one thing. It's the only thing. I mean, you're able to take the experience and see it in parts. You're able to integrate what people were saying to you, that it will be better. You really took that in and allowed that to support you. And you also knew that this too shall pass kind of thing. You seem to understand that you will have the emotional tools to get through it. So you didn't let the experience itself become the only thing that you were dealing with. And that's actually how we have to work in the future. We were just talking a little bit beforehand about this is a lifelong journey. And those emotions do feel strong in the moment. It's the tools that we have and the insight and awareness and understanding of ourselves that really does help us throughout our life. It's not just like getting to some conclusion. Oh, I did it. Am I free? Am I healed? No, sorry. There's the process you went through is the learning in the way you're growing.
Yeah. I know that there's still work to be done in the future, even regarding my mother and these same topics. Because I think you had mentioned in one of the sessions we had, there's these moments of clarity, and these moments that we have are kind of fluid and at times fleeting. With me, I have these moments where I feel like I'm ready to do it. I feel very confident. And then, a few hours will go by. You're waiting for someone to get back to you with their schedule or whatever. And those things kind of ebb and flow, and you feel, okay, maybe I'm not so ready. Oh, I'm feeling like, physically ill. But yeah, those tools are very helpful to know, to take a step back and say, okay, I'm feeling physically ill in my body. Take a moment to breathe and feel that in my body. Where in my body am I feeling it? And why exactly is it maybe coming up for me? That's been a really great tool for a lot of anxiety for much of my adult life.
That's excellent too. I mean, to be able to actually sit with the feeling, again, most likely you see the bond of disgust, of despair, of uncertainty, what's going to happen. That's something, this is very primitive, but meaning that it's in our state of survival that we're working and maybe very unconscious about what it is that you think that you're doing. So a lot of times too, in these kinds of relationships, even though you're not conscious or aware of the destructive force that you think that you hold, we come face to face with it when we have to tell our mother no, and fear that's going to destroy her, and really have only ever processed the word no at a destructive level, or that's going to fragment her. That's going to make her fall apart and not be able to pull herself back together, disorganize her. This is what we end up making. This is an unconscious way of organizing why we're so important to mom in these ways. Well, we must be the cornerstone. So I think you are able to process the anxiety, that feeling, and calm your body down. And if you can get back to neutral, you can get back to thinking and then go, oh, but mom has her own brain and her own life, and I do too. And I can take care of myself. That's what I'm doing. So I wonder how you do get past. I mean, I kind of put that in there, those resistances to start speaking.
And it's not really like I'm shelving the anxiety or the dread or the physical feeling. It's not like I did something in my head to make it kind of sit on the back burner so that it's not bothering me. It is still there in the moment. And it's a matter of knowing it, recognizing it, accepting that it's going to be there while I have to do this. And then trying my best to remember all of the things that we've talked about and the things that have helped me, and kind of put those two together and work with them side by side.
Right. And that's it. And that's a process you're doing all internally. That's what's cool. I think that's the thing, is that you have many levels of mind that you're mentalizing on, and the acceptance of the feeling that it's going to be there, instead of allowing it to become a resistance that you make mental excuses for not going there. That's so key.
Which I definitely have done in the past for years, made mental excuses to not have those conversations, or reasons why my mom can't handle those conversations. And it definitely helped for me to write basically a script for myself.
Good.
And yeah, I had written kind of that letter to my mother before, that I wasn't sure that I needed to say at all. And my best friend said, why do you think that you can't say these things? You've written it out. I think it's very succinct. Why do you think that it's not okay to just say that? And I was like, oh, I think maybe they're right. So I reiterated this letter in a more organized fashion, shorter for my own sake, because I didn't know how much of what I needed to say was going to be something that I could say. And I made like bullet points for myself, like, okay, you need to really get this point across, even if you skip the little tidbit next to it that, kind of drives in the point. This is the ultimate point, say these things. So there's kind of a short page in my notebook with bullet points on the most important bits.
Really, really cool. I want to point that out to anyone, too, listening and thinking about doing this exercise. What you did there was made sure you didn't get distracted and go down a rabbit hole away. And so what you kind of preempted the unconscious movement to go, okay, let's just talk about details and get into some sort of conversation about something more topical. No, wait, that's not the point. Mm-hmm. Actually, the points are very much underneath the details. So you were able to kind of detect that maybe there was, and I do read people's letters if they're writing them to different, boss or, something where there's a conflict or there's some sort of power difference. And it's a description. That description can just come from you if they ask, right? Mm-hmm. It's a description of the point.
Mm-hmm. And it did. So some of the points that I made that I had written down, I didn't really use, and I used other points. And there was a moment of like resistance in her that I could see was going off on her emotional deep end. And it happened pretty early on because I started with some of the smaller things. Like I worry that, when you give gifts to me, they feel transactional. And I had mentioned at one point, feeling like I was kind of parenting her at times, mm-hmm. and feeling like, and I used some of your words, feeling like a container for her emotions. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned her mother, and when, my grandmother died, and how I felt like I was kind of carrying her and parenting her in those times. And that prompted her to go off on the tears. And, I was trying to figure out how to survive without my mother, and very, really gut wrenching things that would normally, have anyone, in their feels and needing to, comfort somebody. But I recognized exactly what it was when it happened. And I didn't necessarily dissociate and leave the conversation. I anticipated that she was going to do that anyway. And so I just kind of knew that that's where she was going. And when she was done feeling those feelings, I let her have that moment. And then I took the conversation back to where it needed to be. As soon as she finished, I said, I understand, but you have to understand that when you're feeling that way and you have moments like that, at times, it can feel like a big weight on the people around you to make you feel better, or, not have you fall apart at those times. So that was a really big moment that I kind of asterisked in my mind. Oh, this is exactly what we were talking about.
Yeah, you can have this. So that's exactly, you can have the insight and have done the work. So when you go into the conversation, you have that objective third, you have that part of your mind that's still observing, not that it's disconnecting you, dissociating you, that you can't empathize or understand what somebody's saying, but you can anticipate and you can see, the where you'd usually go, you just all of a sudden have like this fast forward kind of view of, if I go this way, this is what's going to happen. And if I stay here, this is what I can handle. And so many, my association to what you just said too, was I just saw the adult in you finally speak very clearly to her. And this is one of the things that you really wanted to do without maybe even having to say it directly, is to see that I am an adult. I'm performing in my life as one. I'm competent. I am here, and I need you to see me not as the little one, not as the youngest, and not as the one who makes mistakes, all of these things that you're projecting onto me. And in that moment, I really heard the woman, the adult, the maturity in your voice and in how you handled that situation, which I really think in a dynamic like your mom's and yourself, one of the things that they're trying to continue to do unconsciously is keep you, their child, the function of their child, and however that looks.
Yeah. And I do think that I kind of had a best case scenario with my mother. All of the what if things that I had been thinking about, shattering her world or breaking her down. She was very receptive to what I had to say. And I did say, I want to have a close relationship with you, an adult relationship with you. We just have to change the dynamic of it right now. And she was very much open to that. And she didn't, want to lose our relationship either. So she did sit and listen, which was probably a shock to, most of us. I spoke to my brother beforehand, and I kind of told him, it was actually nice to connect to my brother in that way. I told him beforehand what I was going to do as kind of a heads up in case she went to him. And, he was like, just be prepared for the fallout. And I don't really think that it's nearly as bad as anyone thought it would be. By the end of the conversation, I told her, I do have some boundaries that need to be put in place. I'm not sure exactly right now what those boundaries are, but I hope you'll respect that when they come up, that when I set a boundary, that you will, respect that, and we can move forward in our relationship in that way. And she very much agreed and said, we had talked about that a long time ago. When I had moved home from Durham.
Okay.
She and I had a moment where we were talking about my stepsister and a boundary she had set, and my mother didn't understand why. And I kind of had to explain to her why my stepsister had set this boundary with my stepdad. And she kind of had this aha moment, and I used it as a moment to go, if I had a boundary like that, I would hope that you would respect it as well. So she remembered that moment and brought it back to the conversation, which was really great.
Yeah. And I think that is good to give her reference points, just like any of us need to remember in a moment where we're entering into a new state where possibly we have to, like, where are we in this frame? Where are we now? Like, everything is shifting. The paradigm is shifting. Giving people reference points is really helpful. So that's a kind thing to do. And then also, but I was going to say, the best case scenario, even though I think that it is important to note that you had a good experience doing this, I believe that people that do the prep work, that enter into self-inquiry, that do it the way that you've done it, and also then start to prepare themselves, understand themselves, actually take the time to, do the script and to make sure the points are there and to breathe through it. I have seen, because I've done this work with adult children and parents, and I've had this watch this conversation unfold, being the moderator for this kind of conversation. And that generally is the outcome. The parent does see the work that you're doing. They do love you. They are interested in what is happening. They don't want to be attacked. But as long as you continue to stay in this process, I really find that a lot of people have this notion that it's going to be some sort of tyrannical moment of chaos and, how dare you, or, oh, you've hurt me so badly and I'm a victim. But once the work is done, I have never seen that. I actually haven't. unless you're asking a parent. No, I say it never. Unless you're asking a parent to do so, like to cross a bridge and empathize with you in ways that they can't.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that feels really difficult for them. However, it seems like you really did. This was more of a, let's look at our relationship, look at where we are as adults, and let's mature. That sounds like a good idea. and just so many people don't do it, that they're left in very immature relationships with their parents. And finally, then just switching roles. I mean, we can go into at some point taking care of the parent. Like you never really left the caregiving dynamic. It just stayed in place if you never maturated it. So.
Yeah. And on that subject, when I brought up my mom's mother, she used that in the rest of our conversation. She was understandable to a point where she said, I know how you're feeling. I felt this way about my mother too. And in that, I noticed that she probably did the opposite of what her mother did,
Right.
Bringing the hammer down and being, very strict with rules. My mother didn't want to be that, so she flipped the script and then ended up doing kind of the same things that my grandmother did in, a codependent relationship. And correlating her relationship with her mother to what I was talking to her about really helped her empathize with what I was saying.
Yeah, I will say that most people have not learned how to empathize. And if you know how, you can do that. You can use experience that they're having to show you about experience you're having and say, see, this is the way it all connects. And can you put yourself in my shoes now? It's that extra step. Usually it stays like, this is just my experience and here's my projection. And I can sympathize with you, but I don't empathize.
Mm-hmm.
And now you turn sympathy where she saw likeness into, can you really understand me as a person? Because that's where connection comes from, is when you're looking at somebody that is, and empathy is interesting. It's not that you can just put yourself in their shoes and then become like the chameleon or them. It's you stay a self, you stay full whole, and are able to mentally do that and appreciate both a likeness and difference in that moment. So there's something about that doesn't merge you like sympathy would. That doesn't put that on you. Oh, I see how you feel. Oh, I feel so bad for you. It must be so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's more of, wow, that's very interesting. We're having a like experience. And I think, again, that is kind of the goal, the silver lining, the value of doing this work with your parents. If you really are able to do that, this is something that they have these moments and you crystallize, and that's the new mental map.
Yeah, we actually talked about the mental map, not necessarily with that language, but she spoke to me about, she's like, I was just talking to your stepdad about how, you always see your kids as kids. And I said, well, it's something that I've been talking about in therapy. And, I do want to be seen as an adult. And I feel like sometimes I am just being remembered as a teenager or in my 20-year-old self, when I, was living in the house with you and maybe like we were closer, but I feel like for much of the family, I don't have that respect that I should have as an adult, in my mid 30s. And she was like, yeah, we were just talking about how hard it is to see your kids as an adult. And I was like, well, that is definitely something we should work on. And she was like, yeah, I think you're right.
Yes. Notice the challenge and then accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that when we do that, even when I work with parents with teenagers. They think that the behavioral techniques of disciplining them are supposed to work. I mean, then we can talk a little bit more about, I'm also thinking about you parenting, everything that's happened the last week, to kind of segue into that. But I think that one of the main things is to move from behavioral modification, like don't do this, do that, you're my little kid and I'm able to kind of order you around easily, to negotiating. Oh, you have a mind, you have an identity, you have a opinion, you want to go do this, you want to go do that. Now it becomes a little more ambivalent. How do I give and take to this? So the parent has to start negotiating. If they try to keep the child in just a disciplinary habit with them, like a behavioral relationship and dynamic, it becomes really difficult. So something like that is going to have to happen. And I really think you starting conversations and being open to having these conversations, with her when they come up is how.
Mm-hmm. And I hope I keep that kind of mindset and that door open, because I set the stage for it when I said that I need boundaries, and those will come up when I realize I need to set a boundary. I will state that. So I hope that I have, the wherewithal to be in that moment and notice when I need to set the boundary in the moment.
Absolutely. And pointing out times where, there can be empathy, there can be connection, there can be difference in connection. Those are all very important opportunities within the interaction. Mm-hmm. So, and keeping that kind of, again, remember, it's a rigid road. It's like I say it's rigid, but it's more like a channel that's been carved again and again, fired together, wired together kind of thing. And now you're trying new experience. So the more that you're able to push into these new areas of discussion and talking and getting to know one another. I mean, how well does she really know you and you her? Mm-hmm. Right? So asking questions is really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and now I think that this is a good time to move into the idea that we were working on before. I think in the beginning was a little bit on being a step parent, being a parent, seeing that in you and how this has started to change ideas within yourself about where you are as a woman, a mother, and how this is all going to play into your being a mom.
Mm-hmm. And I thought about that a lot last week. About 2 weeks ago, we found out that I was having a miscarriage. And I think that is partly why having this talk with my mother was also, it just kind of compounded into one of the hardest weeks of my life. I'm trying to focus on what needs to happen with my mother, but I'm also, experiencing this huge loss and grief, and not necessarily trying to put it on the back burner, but trying to find room in my head and in my life to process both things. And that was something that I didn't think I was capable of. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk to my mother while this is happening. I don't know if I'm going to be able to take care of myself physically if I'm still trying to talk with my mother and put that in the front. And, I've gotten through part of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, why that is so important, I think, to note about womanhood in general. How many aspects of life that we deal with at once. Mm-hmm. We are like the emotional, I don't know, I want to say like we bear the emotional burden in some ways of so many things that we're responsible for. Anything emotional we're responsible for. How about that? And that, that we're doing it in the right way, or we're doing it in the positive way. We're doing it in the way that services everyone, the way that, how do I get all of these things, done in that amount of time? How do I take care of myself and still do this? I wonder, in some ways, like if you felt like you were putting yourself last, seen as talking to your mother as something for you or for her or for me, or for, where you were in some ways, how are you prioritizing? Because this will happen again and again and again.
Mhm.
This is one of these things that women, unfortunately, I think have to juggle or tend to juggle.
hmm It was definitely priority wise. It did feel like everything was mine and for me, and all of the things that I was experiencing, and maybe the fact that they were kind of happening all at once. There was a flood of different emotions around knowing that this is all my thing, and I'm not alone in talking to my mother. I know other members of my family have felt similarly. I'm not
Mhm.
alone in having a miscarriage. I have my partner with me and people around me who have been, itching to support me, who've been really extending help and reaching out, which has been great. But I've felt very heavy in that I knew it was all my thing. It was all a moment where I needed to focus on myself, because that was the point of speaking to my mother, and knowing that people are focusing on me because I'm experiencing this loss. And at times it made me feel really guilty that I wasn't, focusing on other people first. And it was almost as if I needed to get comfortable trying to put myself before everyone else in that moment. I was like, of all times in my life, I really feel like this is the time that I need to be putting myself first and being quote unquote selfish in that way. And it was very uncomfortable.
Mhm. That's really honest. And I think you're using even the words, the quote unquote selfish, putting yourself first because of the belief system that we're raised in, the way that our mind is informed by. I personally feel that this is very socially constructed too. Putting the other first. This isn't just even about mom or that dynamic. Is turning the other cheek and these kinds of things, is that when you're in the most pain, it's the most difficult to accept that the help that you need. It's almost like, okay, what's going to happen? You're having to trust that putting yourself first won't get you rejected. And there are all these people going, me, let me support you. And you're like, I don't know if it's a good idea. But, there's also a little bit of rub, on another facet of this when we feel, very vulnerable. Can we put ourselves into other people's hands? And do we feel like we must kind of retreat into isolation and kind of dig in on ourselves? Victimization, by the way, and this is not necessarily what you were doing, but it's something that we sometimes retreat into in order to kind of give ourselves a whack or two. And I find that, and being open to accepting love and staying in a positive space and accepting, what's happening, and replace that with love that's coming in. Why, and that's what you needed, right? That's another part of this, I think, that's tied to guilt, is this, to go and hurt yourself instead of open yourself up to the support that you have around you.
Mhm.
Anything coming to mind when I say that?
Yeah, because there's definitely that urge to shut in and recluse. And I'm also not feeling great physically. I've been ill. I've been not eating well. My stomach just hurts. I feel like I do need a moment of rest. I've been napping like crazy. I'm ridiculously tired. But having people reach out to me in that way, I had the urge to kind of step back and say, I'm not sure if I can be around too many people at the moment. And I talked to my partner about it a little bit, and we mentioned maybe not, going out to see people, but someone offered to come stay with us for a few days and help. My best friend is coming down.
Awesome.
Half, the country away, coming down to be with me at this time. So I'm trying to kind of stay in that moment of, I don't know everybody here very well. I haven't lived in the city for very long. So all of these people who are offering support are really new friendships, but I feel like I can set a good precedent for myself in these friendships if I do remain, open and receptive to what they're willing to give.
And, and this is where you surprise yourself, where you're able to remain open and see that people, even that are new to your life, might have experiences that are interesting, that are informative, that are supportive, that are empathetic. But I think it's about the receptive mode, and feeling that in these types of, where you're coming from, again, in a dynamic of how you've been raised, you're a giver. And I think that this whole experience of loss and receiving love and care, and that's different. It's very different. And would you, if you're obviously a giver, you want somebody to take it, right? That's the kind of thing but it's not a full circle experience yet, where you're seeing the other part of it and allowing yourself to relax and receive and enjoy and be cared for. Though I do hear a lot of what you're saying is you have, and this is so healthy, you have not isolated yourself as a person. You're not just with your guy in a new town and nobody around. You have friends there. You still remain, in friendships that, your best friends coming down. I hear that as something that, like, you already have something that's very healthy that I sometimes don't see. In longer term, maybe if you were to codependent relationships where it ends up being, the focus is the relationship, the family, the responsibility, and then you isolate from your friends.
Yeah.
So.
And I've been there, and I'm trying not to do those things because I do recognize them as, not having friends at all was definitely the big red flag in my last codependent relationship.
Right.
Not having anything outside of the relationship, you just put everything on each other. And I'm bound and determined not to have that in this relationship. Right.
And it seems like it allows for a lot more being there for one another. So in thinking about being there for one another, how did it work out? So this is another one of those balls in the air that are juggling, that never land, for the 7-year-old, for the little guy. How did you balance your feelings out around that, or responsibilities there? Because I know that you have quite a few.
And I'm his primary caregiver at the moment. Everyone else has longer jobs. His dad's at work most of the day, almost giving like 12-hour days. So a lot of the time that I spend with him is just us. And it was something last week where I felt like I didn't know if I could do this week at all, because I was having such a hard time caring for myself physically. Like, I don't know how I'm going to care for a 7-year-old if I don't even know if I can get out of the bed in the morning. How am I going to get this kid to school? And it's funny when you're in that moment where you just need to get out of bed and take the 7-year-old to first grade, you just get up and do it. And, there's a lightness to kids that when you wake up in the morning and this kid's in your face, you do feel a little bit better. Not all of the weight is on you in that moment because you don't want to put it on the kid. And I mean, I'm kind of recognizing that as a healthy thing that my mother didn't do for me at times. And it kind of comes naturally to me to put my issues on the nightstand and get up and have an enjoyable morning with my 7-year-old. And it's been good. I take him to the park after school every day. And I think I've been doing it more often because that's good for me as well as it is for him. It gets me out of the house, even if I'm not really around anybody. I'm just kind of experiencing this nice day and watching the kids play at the park. So it's been good in that aspect, but it's also been a lot because he's got his own things going on. He's having trouble listening, as the adults would say, and I think. Well, we can get into that if you have a question for me and what I just said.
Well, I think what I hear is that every time you ask yourself, how am I going to, you can hear in your own mind that this question isn't authentic. It's a doubt. It's a question, and this is something that's really interesting too about self-sabotage. I was talking about this yesterday a little bit. Like, you can say positive things to yourself. I've been really doing well, eating healthy for a long time, or for 3 weeks. I'm ready to, I probably can, have that burger, have that thing or whatever. And this goes for anything. This goes for dating. This goes for whatever your thing is that you're trying to become healthy around. You'll say some positive thing to yourself and then a negative thing after. That means I can go and do it again. Smoking, addictions, anything. I've been doing really well. I can have one. Really? Okay. So interesting that your mind said something to you, but it actually gave you the opportunity to regress, fall backwards, feel guilty and terrible. Same thing with this question that you keep asking yourself. How am I? And sometimes it is a moment of feeling that overwhelm. It's like an indulge, of I can't. I'm going to break. I'm going to ask somebody. And then you do the thing. You're like, wait a second, what was that? Because the child's smiling and actually it's such a relief in some ways. Like, hey, how's it going? I don't have to be in my own head right now. This is excellent. I like little kids, like a big smile and you ask cool questions and you're ready to go. Maybe there's a little back and forth, but that's the beauty of it. However, to rely on that, I think that then when parents sometimes live through their children instead of deal with their problems, this is where I guess I'm trying to get you to think a little bit about how you're dealing with him. Is it that's changed, or if you're able to see that, the way that the listening part, are you, that's what I was like. That was the part where you were seeing mom and you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
I do, listening, I think, is the key word. I've felt compelled to listen more and to be a better listener. And I have been, researching a lot about power play in kids and how a lot of the communication is around control. And I'm starting to see that branch out more, not just with the kid, but in every relationship that I have with anybody. There's so much of it that is sort of based in control. And
give me a little example. When you said that, what were you looking at in your mind?
So with our 7-year-old, the control comes in. We heard a story last week. He was quote unquote bad at the park on the weekend. He found a patch of dirt and stuck his hands in it. And while everyone was saying, no, don't do it, he had this moment. And I felt like I was in his shoes when I heard the story. He's staring at the dirt on his hands and he just decides to rub it all over his face. And for him, that moment was about control. And he has a lot of people in his life who are telling him what to do all the time, when to brush his teeth. I sit with him in the car every morning and he asks me things like, why can't I curse as a kid? Why do we have to wear clothes? Why do people wear clothes all this? All of these things that are rules that are societal maybe, or just things that kind of help you and keep you safe. There's a million explanations for all of those little things, but I see him defining those moments in these moments of control for him, where he hears you, he knows he shouldn't quote unquote do something, but he does it anyway because he is longing for some kind of control. And I'm starting to see that, and I'm my goal for the next month or so is to put it almost seems counterintuitive, but to put some chores and some tasks in place around the home so that he has moments where he feels like he's in control, like being able to pick out what toothpaste he wants in the morning, or dress himself, making his clothes accessible to him in the morning so that he can get dressed himself and pick out what he wants to wear. Giving him these moments of control should hopefully help in those moments where he just feels like he needs to break out of the social norms that we all want to break out of.
Right. And, he's such a wonderful age. He's very curious. He's very his inquisitive of things that, again, would usually be taken for granted, right? So he's showing you a little bit about his personality. And I really love when you say he's not, I don't know if you caught this, but, and maybe you did, but he's going through a phase of not listening very well. But what you've decided to do is be a better listener. I really think this is key for parents to understand, that your children are only as good as you are at it. So if you want your child to be better at something, you have to grow as a person in that way too, first, because most of this that you're talking about is emotional learning. It's modeling. So, even with a task that you're allowing him to have to organize, to show, and be rewarded for by, a pat on the back, is going to be modeled in some way. So they're looking and they're absorbing, and they're little sponges. And if you ask, like, what an interesting question. Why do we have to wear clothes? Like the imagination of a child, like, what are you thinking? What if we all didn't?
Yeah.
You tell me, sweetie. Right. So I think that this is what's fun about children, is that they are showing you something about themselves. They need that to be honored, but they also need you to be good at what you want them to be better at.
Mm-hmm. And right. That's not easy to constantly remind yourself, I think that is kind of where this kind of superpower that I have of being patient and I am good at listening to other people has come in really big for me, is that I can sit down with him and take the time to listen to what he's saying and genuinely answer him and be honest with him. Those are the bullet points I've kind of made for myself in parenting. Is, I did notice that I needed to listen to him more so that he could be better at listening too. I think that it's massively important that he's given respect, because I feel like that is what so many people are missing the mark with, is, they're kind of just telling the kid, like, this is how we do it. This is what we do. I was upset about the things I needed to do as a kid too. And you're very much dismissed and told to go do something else and be quiet. I'm doing, something important. I need you to go over here and do this. If I have a moment where I'm doing something important, something else needs my attention, and he came up and asked me a question in that moment, I make a point to go back later and explain the why of what he was asking. Oh, okay, that was important. It's an important moment to go back and, teach. I think that I'm not a bad teacher. I've been trying my best to give him time and listening and actually teaching him genuine things about the world.
Right. Teaching him how to think for himself.
For himself, definitely.
And not just telling him everything and him just, going in the opposite direction. That's where usually most of us are left off. And developing and absolutely taking your time and developing that capacity, wonderful thing. And I think children also help us as adults to continue to help us access our imagination, our creative and our fantasy and our ideas in a healthy way, not just living there, but, the kind of what if, because their perspectives are much more unbound, right? So I think that, it feels good. And where you're at seems like there is going to be your best friend's coming. There's going to be some time for you to, decompress, feel yourself again, and start to move forward, but you're still in the space of healing. So if you need another session, you let me know. But we'll do that off the podcast and we'll figure that out from there. But I think that for now, what I see is a full circle, and that you've got this. I'm really excited for you, actually, in a lot of different ways.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I'm not really sure what the future will hold. I feel like the next month is going to be very, I don't know. And I'm pretty okay with that, because I know that I've talked to you about a lot of these things. I have my support network, and I'm just trying to remain aware.
Yeah. And that's what we can do. And every day, I believe, continuing to kind of that's why mindfulness practices are so important. We can recalibrate where that awareness is once, we've found it, right? And am I closing in on one area? Why? Shifting a little bit to see if you can open it. But if it needs to stay there for right now, there's something to work through. But self-awareness is this continuous process that continues to unfold, and your life stabilizes because you're doing it, in a lot of ways. So, and feels a lot more whole. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, your time, your energy, and juggling all of this to show up each week. I know this is the kind of thing, is that sometimes people are like, I got to cancel. Why? I'm having a really hard time. That's when you need.
That's the point. Yeah. And thank you, because the format of this, I do tend to kind of spill all for people in hopes that I help anyone else out there. And it does feel really vulnerable. And I didn't realize it until I let my partner listen to some of the episodes. And I was like, oh man, I'm saying a whole lot, getting to know me right now. Yeah. But also in being able to go back and listen to our episodes, it really helped me in writing out what I needed to say to my mother, because we had talked about those moments of kind of fleeting clarity. I was able to go back and listen to what we were saying, and really take note of the main points that were coming up for me. So thank you for having this experience for people like me.
Yes, it's been phenomenal. And I think that's very interesting too, to be able to record. Usually people would be like, no, but yeah, when we talk about the lighthouse effect, the fleeting moment of clarity. Well, how do we get it if we can't? And we learn through re-listening once we get over the kind of like, whoa, what did I just do? But
Yeah.
we learn through repetition, and that's awesome. So let's keep talking, and I can't wait to hear about your journey as it continues to unfold. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. In closing, I encourage anyone wanting to walk the same path she did to listen to the steps we took and the process she was guided through as many times as needed. Our guest took notes, discussed her plans with others, and did the prep work necessary to organize her thoughts and feelings before she entered into the conversation. When you go about the work this way, it is not uncommon to feel empowered and successful at accomplishing your relationship goals. Instead, what we do is a lot of times allow our fears to lead us away from having these conversations. So instead of them getting easier over time and that person knowing you more each time you open up, it gets harder and that authentic voice of yours more deeply repressed. So take the time to do the work. Our next guest is ready to develop herself and her understanding of herself further so she can work on her relationship with her husband after many years of dysfunction and emotional ups and downs. Hope to see you there.